it's a new year, why don't we try some new things? Firstly, standing up in videos. Happy 2014 everyone. I hope you all had a lovely Hogmanay. I am here today to share with you my top 13 books of 2013. To begin with, one that I finished recently and haven't had a chance to yet talk about on my channel, and it's Room by Emma Donoghue. I think it was Ariel Bassett's discussion of this book that really spiked my interest. I'd heard of Emma Donoghue before, but this book in particular was definitely one that I heard of on her channel. The story is narrated by a 5-year-old boy whose entire life has been spent in a single room, and the only two people he's had contact with have been his mother, who he lives with day in and day out in this room, unable to leave, and their captor, who occasionally visits. It is quite an upsetting, quite a disturbing setup at the beginning of this book. This boy was born in this room after his mother was impregnated by her captor. Never having left this room, his mother has taught him that this is the world. She hasn't wanted to give him anything to lust after outside of the room. So they watch television every day. However, he believes everything on the television is just in the television and there is nothing outside this room, which makes it a very interesting perspective to have the story told from. I did actually cry in this book. It really tugged at my heartstrings. It was very emotional. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen, and I don't want to give it away for anybody out there, but it is well worth a read. It is an absolutely fantastic book, and I flew through it despite it being of a reasonable size. Next is another one that I haven't really talked about, and it's Seraphina by Rachel Hartman. As you may be able to guess from the cover, this is a fantasy novel starring dragons. Dragons being one of my all-time favourite mythical creatures, closely tied with unicorns, I think, but I love fiction about dragons. I think they really complete any world building in a fantasy realm. Rachel Hartman's dragons in particular are quite different from what you might have experienced in dragon literature before, and in this case the dragons are all in human guise. There is peace between the humans and the dragons after a long war between them. The only way for them to peacefully coincide is for the dragons to live as if they're humans. So they look like humans, their emotions or lack thereof are very different from humans, and that's what distinguishes them. And our main character, Seraphina's world, is linked between the two, and we see the interactions between the two races develop as the book goes on, and it's just a really fantastic book. Although it was a very slow start. Up until about page 100, I was not enamoured. I was like, this is kind of mediocre. But after that, it made up for it. It was fantastic and I really enjoyed it. And I think if you've tried to read this book and not managed to get past the 100-page mark, there is a revelation that I think will inspire you to keep going. So I'd persevere. I do think the author maybe could have given us that revelation a little earlier on, because I think some people will have put down the book who might not have if they'd gotten that far. But other than that, I think it's fantastic and I'm really looking forward to the sequel. Next is Chocky by John Wyndham. I read 2 John Wyndham books this year and started a third. I couldn't really pick between this and the Midwich Cuckoos, but I decided to go for Chocky. I think mainly because I think this will appeal to more people. It's a very short book. It's a piece of science fiction John Wyndham wrote in the 1950s, 60s. A lot of his literature is influenced by the Cold War era and fear of the Soviet Union, and that's kind of reflected through science fiction. The main premise is that a young boy named Michael has become a host to an alien life form named Chocky. The story is narrated by his father, which gives you an interesting perspective because he's not the one directly affected by the alien influence, so he is never entirely aware of what is going on, and his curiosity becomes your curiosity. This book has a very 1950s sensibility to it. There's something very proper about it. It never really lets loose or goes wild, but I really like that about John Wyndham's writing style. I know some people don't enjoy that. I think it's good. I really enjoy it, and I think this book is great and really worth checking out even if you're not really into science fiction. Next up is another piece of 1960s literature, a period I am discovering I really like the literature of, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I have talked about this book multiple times on my channel, so I won't talk about it too much. Shirley Jackson's books are kind of like psychological thrillers, mysteries, a little bit of all that. Creepy, definitely creepy. She always gives you a really interesting perspective into different psyches. In this one, I feel like we learn about mob culture and the effect of gossip and rumour spreading and the effect that can have on a community and individuals, and it is very disturbing and very gripping and not very long, so a really enjoyable, fast-paced read that will keep you gripped. And again, Shirley Jackson's prose are just incredibly eloquent and beautiful. Next up, I read and enjoyed for the first time this year Heliodorus's Ethiopica, or An Ethiopian Romance, which is the longest of the ancient Greek novels. It's not my favourite of the 5 ancient Greek novels, however I did thoroughly enjoy it, and my 2 favourites I read in 2012, so. There was a little bit more suspense in this one for me than I felt were in the other ones, which was one of the reasons I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a little bit different because I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. I think because there was a lot of jumping in time period and perspectives and characters, there was a lot going on, and it really did keep me interested, and I really enjoyed it. This book is one that I read right at the beginning of the year in January, I think actually the day after it came out, but it is a book that has stayed with me through the entire year, and it's The Madman's Daughter by Megan Shepherd. The sequel to this actually comes out in a couple of weeks, and I am incredibly excited. I've been waiting for this day, and since I finished this book, it is one that gave me a real book hangover. I finished it and just didn't even know what to do with myself. I was just sitting in my bed and my flatmate came through and I was like, Harriet, I'm not sure I know how to cope. The story is based on The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells and is set during the 1800s. It follows a young woman called Juliet, whose father has been ostracised to an island off the coast of Australia because he's a mad scientist and they no longer wanted in London. And she goes to join him, and creepy madness ensues, really. There is a bit of romance in this. It is a YA novel, and if you're into YA, then I can't recommend this more. It's one of those books that's really given me faith in the YA genre, although it isn't something that I read predominantly, but it's made me want to read more YA because this is just so phenomenal, and I cannot wait to read the sequel. Next up is a book that I don't have a physical copy of, but it is the Lord of the Rings series, which I read for the first time this year, and in particular the first one, The Fellowship of the Rings. I read The Hobbit when I was much younger and reread it at the beginning of the year, and because of the Hobbit release and rewatching the Lord of the Rings films, I was inspired to finally read the books. If you haven't read them but really enjoy the films, then they are well worth a read. There's so much more to them. Obviously I don't really need to go into the plot, but yeah, if you're one of those people like me that still hasn't read The Fellowship of the Rings, please do. It's amazing. Another series I managed to finally start this year was His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. I only managed to read number 1, which was The Northern Lights, or I believe in some other countries the title is The Golden Compass, like the film's called. Philip Pullman's imagination blew me away. The world he created was so interesting and intricate, and the main character Liza was really engaging and endearing, I felt. I really enjoyed following her, and for being a children's book I found it incredibly complex and kept me hooked the entire time. Whilst we're talking about children's literature, a children's book for an even younger audience really than His Dark Materials that impressed me this year was Fortunately the Milk by Neil Gaiman. I just thought for what that book was, a children's book for probably under 10s, I was really impressed. I thought it was absolutely perfect. It was perfect for what it was, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was really funny, and I just think it's one of those children's books that will stand the test of time. It's fantastic, and it's the kind that parents would really enjoy reading to their children, reading with their children, because it's just so well written and really witty. Next is a graphic novel, and it's The Unwritten by Mike Carey and Peter Gross. This graphic novel in particular I just think is perfect for book lovers. I haven't gotten very far in this series yet, but I'm really excited to because there's a lot of threads in this story and I can't wait to see how they all tie together. The story follows Tommy Taylor, whose father was a best-selling author who published a book whose main character is also called Tommy Taylor, and the story behind those books is much like Harry Potter. He was a boy wizard. Tommy Taylor's father has now disappeared, and his fan base has got an obsession with his son, who they think is the boy wizard, and that has obviously impacted on his life. And the penultimate book is actually a piece of non-fiction, and it's Ctesias' History of Persia, Tales of the Orient. The introduction to this book was written by Lloyd Llewellyn Jones and James Robson, who also translated the section of this book that is actually ancient material. Ctesias was an ancient Greek historian who wrote about Persia after the Persian Wars. He himself actually spent a great deal of his life in the Persian Empire. I have never really been this hooked by a piece of ancient non-fiction. It was really fascinating. The introduction was so accessible and so well written that it really made you interested in Ctesias the man and his writings, and I think really added to my enjoyment of the actual section of this book that is Ctesias. Ctesias does survive in a seriously fragmented form, mainly in epitomes. If anything, that just inspired a further interest for me and made me really appreciate what we do have that survives. So if you're into ancient history of Persia or ancient Greece, then I would highly recommend you check this out. I really don't think you need any background knowledge really, because I think it's all in this book, and I think it is for everybody, not just like academics or students. And last but certainly not least is the final book in the Fruits Basket manga series, which I don't have on me. But I finally got around to finishing the Fruits Basket manga series. I was about halfway through and I read the second half of the bunch this year and was just blown away. My love of the series was renewed, and I just think it's a phenomenal manga series. I think it's a great place to start with manga. It's one of the places I started, even though I put down the series. I think it's a really good length. It's about 23 volumes, so it's not too intimidating. It's also a little bit of a mixture between contemporary real life and magic realism. I think the two go perfectly in this book. I have done a complete review of the series, which I'll link below, I'll tell you a little bit more about what I thought and a little bit more about the plot if you're interested. So I guess that's my year of reading summed up there in my top 13. Can't really believe the year's over. That was really fast. My first year on BookTube, and a fantastic year it has been. I've read a lot of amazing books, a lot of which have been inspired by you guys and other booktubers, so thanks for that, and I can't wait to discover another year of fantastic books thanks to BookTube, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye!